All right. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Data is Love. I'm really excited to welcome CEO and founder Laura Crane from Peri to have what I think is a really important conversation about perimenopause and menopause and all of the ways it impacts women at work. My name is Aparna Ray, and I'm the founder of Moving Beyond, and we do this every single week to talk about things that impact the world of work and what is the data that we're looking at to make better decisions. So welcome, Laura.
Hi, Aparna. I'm so happy I'm here. It's my first LinkedIn Live. Actual fun fact, I am not on LinkedIn for such a long time. So I'm only on LinkedIn for the last 2 months. I think you were one of the people who told me you need to be on LinkedIn. And I love being here and I love having my first live.
Amazing. Okay, so Laura, you and I met through Techstars Seattle at I think sometime last year, right? When you had started the
Yeah,
accelerator. And
yeah.
one of the things that drew me to you is you're working on something that I feel like most people only talk about sort of in like hushed voices. It's always like the quiet conversation that's happening. It's not a thing that we're really talking about openly oftentimes, right? And so I'm just really curious. You've worked for a lot of big brands, like brands that I think people would recognize, not just women, L'Oreal, Procter and Gamble, Wella. Um, why Peri and why now?
Yeah, I think you're so right. I think that in a woman's life, there are a couple of, parts of her journey which start gaining much more attention, which is great, which are mostly her fertile years, right? So there's a lot of conversation, community building, brand building around fertility, around having your first baby, your second baby, if you have babies, about, being a mother, period, infertility. And I think those conversations are great. But I as someone who came from a mother who struggled quite severely through her menopause transition, but also, like you're saying, with the head of a brand builder, I've been, building brands and doing innovation for brands for over a decade. And I do have a sweet spot for especially brands for underserved communities and target groups. And I just found it so interesting and flabbergasting that there is, no brand, no solution, no platform, which is ultimately talking to myself, right? I'm in my late 30s. I'm graduating into that next stage of my life. And there is, to my understanding, no platform in the last 2 years which is addressing perimenopause, which is addressing menopause, which is addressing that transition of being in your mid-30s and then graduating into that new phase of your life. And that, as a personal story, but also as a brand builder, I just found very intriguing to understand why is that? Why is that still such a stigma, like you're saying? Why do we hush about that? And how can we build a platform, a community, and ultimately a brand which, is out there and makes you want to talk about it, makes you want to be part of it. And that's ultimately what I'm after and what I'm trying to build.
Okay, so I heard you say you have a sweet spot for underserved communities, right? And I think that we use the terms underserved, underrepresented a lot. Um, and perimenopause and menopause is something that's going to happen to every single woman, right? And so in a way, I'm like, are we under, like, how we're 50% of the population, like every single one of us is going to experience it. Some of us are already experiencing it, right?
Absolutely.
Right, and a range of symptoms. And so can we backtrack for a second? And for folks that are watching that actually don't know what perimenopause or menopause is, will you tell us what is it? Sort of, when does it start? How long does it last? Because I
Yeah.
think that when people think of menopause, they think of their moms and their hot flashes and driving around with the windows down when it's -5 degrees outside. I feel like that's often the picture, or their mom being really short with them.
No, absolutely. And you're so right. Like, what is underserved? And I always react to when somebody tells me it's a niche or it's a niche. I never know how to pronounce that word because
Yeah.
it is not, right? It is affecting half half the population. What I find so intriguing around menopause and perimenopause is that we often associate with menopause something which is happening when we're older, right? And we think of older when we're mid 50s, beginning 60s. And that is the big misconception around the menopause transition, because you are officially in menopause when you have not experienced, or when you have not had your period for 12 consecutive months. Then you're officially in menopause and you're kind of out of your fertile years. However, the time leading up to that moment, that is what you call perimenopause, and peri means around the menopause. That is a transition which can last up to 15 years. The average age of menopause, so that one moment when you do not have your period for 1 year in a row, is 51. And the average age of a woman starting to experiencing symptoms can be around 41 to 43, and even in your late 30s, so 38, 39. What's so interesting about it is that what you were saying, like, we remember our mothers, with the window open. So menopause is associated a lot with physical symptoms like hot flashes and night sweats. That's also what the media makes out of it. So when you now Google menopause, you see all these kind of cliche cartoons of women, with red hats and not being able to sleep, or but there is, more than 60, if you want to call them, symptoms and signs in the perimenopause and menopause transition, which are all over the place, right? So it's not only physical, it can be a lot emotional. So, for example, anxiety, brain fog, rage, mood swings. So there's this whole spectrum of mental and emotional signs and symptoms, which we see in our community, in the peri community, which I will talk a little bit later about, is affecting even more women than the physical ones. So that's the kind of the taboo within the taboo. So perimenopause is already one stigma, and then that emotional and mental well-being is another one, which we need to crack and which we need to get out in the open, because many women are so surprised by how much they're more anxious or how much they are more even depressed, and they don't associate that with the menopause transition, while this can be absolutely a a sign of that.
More than 60 symptoms and signs. That's so much.
Yes.
Right, like you said, average age for menopause 51. You haven't had your periods for 12 consecutive months. But perimenopause can start like in your late 30s. And it just kind of strikes me that there is so much conversation about the impact of childbearing and rearing and caregiving on women's careers. But then we start hitting menopause, oftentimes also as we're hitting our stride and getting into senior management roles.
Absolutely.
Right? Like late 30s, early 40s, that's when you've been at your job for maybe 15 or 20 years. Like now you're like squarely in senior management, and you're getting hit with things like brain fog. You're like, some people have really intense physical symptoms. You feel emotional, you feel ragey. And so what is the conversation we should be having about perimenopause at work, especially because I imagine that it's impacting all women, but in particular, like senior leaders?
Yeah, absolutely. Two important or interesting numbers around that. More than 30% of women say that perimenopause and menopause negatively affects their performance at work. And around 20% of women, and that number I find most shocking, leave their work due to perimenopause and menopause signs and symptoms, and just the kind of the consequences of that. It is such an interesting conversation, which we had in our community app as well a lot, in how do you want to communicate that? How do you want to handle that? I think it all starts similar to other moments in a woman's life, let it be having your period or being pregnant, there needs to be an education within the organization of what does the menopausal transition mean to your colleague. What does it look like? What is the age? How can it impact her? So that many more employees feel comfortable talking to their team, to their superior, to their HR department about that they are now in that phase, right? I think that's something we learn our Peri community, that the more you talk about it, that you can be open about it and communicate about it, that already helps. That already helps you not feel kind of, off and awkward. So that awareness driving is huge. In the UK, they now have don't hold me to the amount of days, but there are menopause leave days, which have now been established,
I love that.
Which is amazing. To be honest, we got mixed feedback on that within our conversations in the app. Some women are like, I don't want to be, kind of marginalized or looked at differently because I'm in my menopause transition. So there's still this shame associated with it, not to be too open within your company and within your teams. It really starts with taking that stigma which we have in our personal lives, taking that out in our professional lives, educating, and just enabling more individuals to talk about it and just to say, look, I'm now 42, I'm experiencing that. It might be, that I'm not remembering some words because I'm experiencing brain fog, and just being a bit more open about that.
Yeah. So you said there's mixed feedback, right? People don't want to be, even if leave is available, people don't want to have the, the flashlight, the spotlight on them around something like this. I'm thinking of just, I think, how women's health and women's needs are perceived at work, right? And so when women take time off for having their kids, right? Which, like, frankly, it's like the only way to bring new humans into the world. If we haven't figured out any other way to do it, like it needs to be incubated inside a human, and then we have new humans, right?
Yes.
That's it. This is the only way. This is the only way for us to like produce the next generation of the workforce. And yet, every time somebody on a team is going on parental leave, there's stigma already, right? It's like, oh, so-and-so is getting paid, right, to have a break. And I'm like, really? Because it sounds horrible. I mean, I'm not a mom, and I'm just like, do I want to be tired all day, every day for years on end? No, that doesn't sound like a vacation.
No.
And then, of course, because I think in just about every single culture, women are responsible or socialized to be responsible for caregiving and the doctor's appointments. Now you're also needing to manage that with your work schedule. And then we're having this conversation about perimenopause, which is going to last for maybe 10 years before you hit menopause, which is going to last for X number of years. And I can imagine like a lot of people at work saying, well, why should women get all of these special accommodations? Like, I want a meritocracy. You put the time in, you get your promotions. Like, you put the time in, you get your bonus. And so what is the conversation we should have instead?
Yeah, I think the long-term impact, and that's something which companies also need to understand, right? If 20% of women, and especially like you're saying, at the peak of their careers with a slew of knowledge and expertise, right? If they drop out at that stage and are kind of lost as an asset to that company, that's very short-term thinking. So it is all about, that it's almost for me a preventive care, right? Before a woman or an individual who goes to menopause burns out and says, I cannot do this anymore, I need to leave the company. Are there ways of accommodating her beforehand let it be through a day off or just through different, I don't know, working environments. For example, I once talked with the founder of Better Not Younger. She's also a former P&G employee, and she is building hair care for the menopausal and transitioning hair. And she was like,
You're
for me,
saying
it was
transitioning hair, which is a nice way of saying you're going to lose your luscious locks. That's a really nice way of saying your hair is going to fall off your head.
Your hair is going to fall off your head. Not always. It can become just more drier, more brittle. But yes, hair is definitely going to change.
Yeah.
And she was like, look, because I could not sleep at night because I had such bad insomnia, I was just so tired in the morning. So just having a flexible work schedule, starting later, having my meetings later during the day, that would have already helped me, right? So it's not about working less or being off. It's just more for some time. That doesn't have to be over years, because symptoms can vary and become better and less pressing, but just for the time where it's actually, bothersome to you and hindering you from doing the work and the level of professionalism you had, just to have some flexibility around that is helpful for so many. And I think that those are the conversations we should have on an individual level. And I think that also takes this whole, or women are just taking a vacation out of it. It's more like, look, like you're saying, there's no other way of bringing humans into this world, and you also won't overcome menopause, right? This will exist. So let's think of ways of just enabling our employees for some time to manage with flexibility, with, I'm now saying a stupid example, with a fan on your table for hot flashes, but just some things which help you, or in other jobs, like which require uniform, more breathable uniforms so you can manage your hot flashes. Those conversations are just important to have. So employees and people in the workforce don't feel like dropping out is the only option for them.
So this is making me think about what about the women who are in jobs that actually don't offer flexibility? Because we've talked about perimenopause hitting you as you're, into your senior leadership years. But in the US, one of the things that we know is that something like 80% of all of the low-wage work is done by Black and brown women. And that tends to be work that obviously doesn't come with flexibility. It's retail, it's frontline, it's, nursing assistants, lots of jobs that have really set hours. And I suspect that that's actually true in UK and Western Europe as well. Like, no matter how progressive we think they are, the frontline work is happening by Black and brown people, and Black and brown women in particular. And so what's the responsibility then of an employer when it's not a senior leader who's asking for flexibility? It's your frontline worker.
You're so right. And the sad fact with Black and brown women in the US now is that women of color experience menopause, or the menopause transition, 9 months earlier than Caucasian women. And they're experiencing hot flashes and symptoms more severe, and often have, of course, less access to either treatment options or mental health care as well. And by treatment options, I mean really going to a gynecologist and having hormones prescribed to you, which is called hormone replacement therapy, which can help many women if it's the right solution for them. And that brings me, to what you're saying and asking is, for a job which doesn't have that flexibility, right, which we talk of and kind of work from home and we take the mornings off, I think that's where it can really start to provide to your employees who don't have the flexibility some sort of level of healthcare when it comes to treating those symptoms as well.
Yeah. And I suppose then picking health insurance plans, which is maybe not something that, someone in Sweden thinking about, where they have universal health care, but picking health insurance plans that are proactively including those kinds of benefits.
Exactly.
I want to switch I want to switch gears to your Peri community,
Yeah.
which is so cool. I learned very recently about estrogen patches from the
Oh,
Peri community as a way to manage like the night sweats,
I'm
which
so
is
happy
my
to
like
hear that.
right? I'm like, how many months in a row do I have to wake up wet before I'm gonna go talk to my physician? I actually made an appointment with my GP to talk about it. So
I'm
what
so
is
happy to
it?
hear that.
What is it? What is the Peri community? And what are the kinds of conversations you see happening there?
Yes, yes. The Peri community is a dedicated menopause and perimenopause app. It's a free app, and the main purpose of the app is peer-to-peer interaction, conversations, and validations. And that's mixed with a lot of content. So we're providing a lot of content. We have a lot of expert voices in the community. We have a lot of live events, podcasts from scientists who are actually studied for that. But what is in the center of it is really peer-to-peer interactions. So you can imagine it like a forum. It's very
Mm-hmm.
straightforward. And we went into building this app with the hypothesis that before you when you start experiencing hormonal changes, you often, before choosing a product or going to a doctor's, you just want to kind of understand WTF is happening, right? So much is going on, and you want to hear from others. Like, am I going nuts, or is this normal? Is the anxiety normal? Are these night sweats that I have to change my sheets 2 times a night? Is that normal? And that is very much
Mm-hmm.
at the center of the Peri community. Those conversations around what am I experiencing? How does it affect my relationship? I've been to the doctor, she dismissed me. How did you go about it? So it's very much about, getting that validation of I'm not going crazy. And then what are your tips and tricks? What is your advice? Obviously not medical advice, but what is your life advice of how to handle that? Um, what we see is that the app is now live for 2 years. Even women who have been in that app for quite some time and who have been helped, they are staying in that platform to then ultimately give back. We call them our big sisters. Those are the ones who have learned along the journey and who are now, exchanging their experiences, their advice, their, what has helped them. And that is all frameworked by evidence-based articles, events, and just expert voices. And that's really helping women to navigate through that transition. So how women find us is they start searching for answers. We get every day in the app posts like, oh my god, I'm not losing my mind, I'm so happy I found this place, I'm so happy my experiences are getting validated. And that
Mm-hmm.
ultimately, just like you were saying with the estrogen patch, that ultimately then helps women to navigate the next steps. How can I talk with my OBGYN? What should I ask to my nutritionist? What should I buy at the supermarket for itchy skin? So it's very much,
Mm-hmm.
kind of a navigation through that. And that's how we see this happening, that women then come back and we have a little subgroup that's called little wins, where they then share what has helped. So for example, I just had a good conversation with my doctor, I'm now on HRT, hormone replacement therapy, or I found this amazing cream at CVS which is helping me with my vaginal itching. Finally a product, so it's very much also across budgets, across incomes, just handy tips and tricks and anecdotes of what has actually help women, and that is what it's all about. And it's just so beautiful to see that this is such an organic, beautifully respectful group. We started off on Facebook, where we still are, but we just said, you don't want to share these intimate details on a platform where you see fishing pictures, of your uncle.
Mm-hmm.
It requires that safe space, and that's what Peri really is.
So I suppose you're not promoting like the jade egg from Goop on Peri.
It's so funny. We have a couple of contributors and like experts in our app. And there is such a dislike and distrust towards Goop. I mean, Goop is, I admire it from a brand point of view, but I don't admire it from a wellness budget advice. I mean, they're really going all over the place. So no, it is, and that's the thing, right? That menopause market attracts a lot of snake oil. There's so many brands preying on that insecurity of women in that space. And what we're really trying to do is get the community talk and really what has helped them, and then frame that with evidence-based tips and tricks,
I
which are
love that.
not the
Yeah.
not the
Which is
not the
not which is not the jade egg or egg
no.
made of any other. Right.
No, no.
Last week I had a colleague, Megan McNally, who's also a community builder and a really rad one. And one of the things that she said was a lot of communities prey on women. They
Hmm.
really prey on women. And we know from everything that we've witnessed in our lifetimes, right? Like you and I probably joined Facebook when we were in college because it's
Yeah.
been around for that long and it's free because they're mining our data. And I'm curious how you're thinking about the data that you're collecting from the Peri community and in what ways do you see it supporting the next phase of your company?
Yeah, absolutely. We get, of course, so much data and insights through the conversations, right? And we're not selling that data because that's not what we're gonna do. But what we're doing is we're learning through that data, so we understand what are really the conversations, what are really the concerns, what is, we always talk about hot flashes. Is it really hot flashes? What we've learned is that health anxiety is a much bigger thing, right? Because so much is happening with your body, and you just, you're like, okay, what is this? Is this cancer? And health anxiety is just so prevalent during out that time. Um, so we're really learning from the data. We also learn how a transition can change. So how does Aparna, talk and ask when she joins the app, and how does, what has helped her, what content helps her, and like what helps her navigate. And that really helps us to decide what is the content we're providing, where should we dig deeper, where should we bundle up with more experts, um, where should we, provide more tools, let it be digital tools or physical tools to help her throughout the transition. But it's very important for us, and that's really the switch from community to any sort of product, right? We know this community will not survive if we start pushing products or services which are preying on that, because that target group is luckily very aware of that snake oil I was referring to. So
Mm-hmm.
everything we do and we will do in the future, which will help us, also drive revenue when it comes to services or products, is really through that community feedback loop. So we are learning from the data, but we're also talking on a regular basis to our big sisters, the most involved community members, really understanding from them what has helped you, where can we help more, is it a service, is it a product, and that will help us, build the future.
And are you seeing, because you have members from all over the world, and I imagine that there are place-based factors that play into the experience and the symptoms of perimenopause and menopause. And
Yeah.
what is that going to look like for the next generation of users on this platform?
Yeah, that is such a good question. We are mainly in the US, so more than 80%, but we do have, of course, community members from the UK, Canada, South Africa, so other English speaking, Nigeria, other English speaking countries. Um, and what works very differently in all these countries is healthcare, of course, and how much you're in touch with your provider and with your healthcare provider. what we see happening with the next generation now, kind of the millennials, and that's us,
Mm-hmm.
Aparna, right? The ones who are
Yep.
now getting into the menopause transition, is these communities and these conversations help women to start the conversations for themselves with their healthcare provider. The generation before us was very much waiting for, okay, and what's next? And what we see happening now is that through the tools which we're now starting to have, is that women are much more proactively saying, okay, I'm now 39. What should I expect in the next 4 to 5 years? And that is, of course, different by every country of how that is in practice, but the tools are the same and the list of questions are the same. And we're now on Saturday, where I encourage everybody to dial in, is a um, uh, a prep talk, how to prepare a conversation with your doctor. So really to have a list ready of questions to ask, which tests to take, which medication to ask for, which lifestyle interventions to ask for, and just having that ready for your conversations.
Ooh, okay. I need to tune into one of these Saturday prep sessions
Yes.
because I have my appointment
Yes.
and I live in the States where, you have to fight for everything.
Yeah.
I
Similar
have
in different
one,
countries. Yeah.
yeah, I have one last question for you before we wrap up, which
Mm-hmm.
is, how should women be advocating for their care with their employers? Because all the advocacy with the doctor is not going to help you if your healthcare is connected to your job, so you need to keep going to work,
Yeah.
right? You can't sign off, but also it has like implications on your career and your household's financial stability and what your kids are going to have access to. So if I'm working for somebody that's really clueless, which probably is most people, right? Most companies, most managers, what are your tips for advocating with our employers?
Yeah. I really think, and it's with employers or talking to, when I was talking to Techstars people, it's like, what is menopause? It's really about awareness, and it's people are not, they don't mean it meanly, but just in ignorance, because often male colleagues don't experience it. If they're younger, they don't experience this. Even me, before I started Peri 3 years ago, I didn't think about it that much, right? I knew it from my mother, but I didn't think about that much. So I think it's all about educating. There's so much information nowadays out there. For example, on our website, which is really kind of breaking down what are the symptoms, what are the ages, what can somebody expect, not only the person who's going through it, but also everybody in her ecosystem, right? Family, employer, what can they expect in those years? So I think before, kind of giving up on your employer and saying, okay, he or she might not understand it either way, it's, sitting together for 15 minutes and just saying, look, like you were saying, Aparna, this is happening to half the population. Funny enough, it's now happening to me. I'm 43. And this is what's happening. You don't have to go into much detail if you don't like, but just starting the conversation, starting the education. We have seen this in our app happening, of women who went to their employer. This has not only been office jobs where you can take off a day and be very flexible, but also jobs which require for you to be there. But just sitting down with someone who, who is responsible for your work schedule or for your working clothes, and just educating that person on what's happening, that conversations are already worth so much. We started it a bit with Peri, of going
Mm-hmm.
into companies and driving education, and those have always
Mm-hmm.
been half an hour, 1 hour conversations, and just the pure basics. It's eye-opening for people, and it just helps them understand, like, and everybody has a story, right? Everybody's like, oh yeah, my mother had this as well, my sister as well, and that drives empathy. And that empathy, I think, will move then, like you're saying, it will move mountains, because it is about accommodating. Maybe it's just a couple of building blocks which can help an employee just not suffer at work, at least.
accommodating building blocks that are that's gonna help employees suffer less at work. I love it because yeah, why? I mean, there's already enough suffering in the world. Laura, I want to
Yes.
thank you so much for joining me. I know it's sort of towards the end of your day,
Yeah.
and you said earlier it's the start of your kind of US facing workday. But thank you so much. And I'm going to encourage everybody that tuned in to go to heyperry.com, Perry. Check it out. If you're in your 30s or 40s and you're feeling all sorts of ways about your body and your mood, I highly recommend joining the app. It's well, that it's free is great, but also the conversations on it are very real, and it's very nice not to be looking at tons of ads like you would on Facebook or Reddit or lots of other communities. So heyperry.com. Laura, once again, thank you so, so much.
Thank you so much, Aparna. I love talking to you. It was a huge honor. Thank you so much for inviting me here.
All right, folks, have a great day.
Bye bye.